dream of towering over your foes? Have you always wanted to crush them with your titanic strength? Are there always these damsels nagging you for help? Or maybe you're the type of person who just wants to show the peasants how honorable and magnificent you are. Well, I can't help you with the damsels, and you should probably call somebody else about that. But if you answered yes to any of the others, then it's time to learn some simplified Imperial Knights. I see everyone taking weird combinations of oaths and troth. I also watch people mess up how to gain and lose honor all the time. Here's some quick notes on the screen. Just copy them down and you won't forget or mess them up from here on out. Now, I won't budge on taking Defend the Realm. It's so good when you're spending all this CP on ion shielding and transhumaning your armigers that I just won't ever not take it. Also, who's going to be alive to tell about how honorable and magnificent you are if you let all the peasants die? That wouldn't be very knightly. So we gotta defend them. For your second option, many of them are cool, but Laylo the Tyrants is by far the best one. It allows for more consistent shooting phases, and it really sucks when you've got a low amount of shots and you miss one, or fail to wound one, and then your Stompy War Machine does virtually nothing on your turn. A lot of people don't like that drawback of having to kill 2 units a turn, but so long as we're bullying the primary, we're going to gain 1 honor from the Defend the Realm anyway, and lose 1 from Tyrants, which will keep us honored. Secondarily, the virtuous ability of Lay Low the Tyrants allows my Big Knight with Mythic Hero to bank an autosave. While it doesn't help every single time, it's nice to just have. In that same vein, don't just be trying to get virtuous. Focus on just staying honored. As for the list, the best choice for a Knight's list right now is a Freeblade Lance. I know everyone says it's complicated, but it's not that bad, and I'm going to break it down right now. So our trait is every unit heals 1 in your command phase, and we ignore all the modifiers to advancing and charging. Additionally, we get to pick a trait for each of our units, and when we pick this trait, each of our armigers in that unit also gets it. So you can have 3 armigers running around with the same trait. First off, we have the Knight Paladin. He's Imperialis just so we can get the Herald Exalted Court upgrade, and with a Paladin, Herald, the Helm Dominatus Relic, we're giving out a 4-up invuln, -1 damage, and reroll 1s to hit and wound to 2 armigers every turn. And each of those turns, one of those armigers gets to keep those bonuses until the end of the battle, or our Paladin dies. What this means is eventually we're making most of our army have these great defensive stats, so long as our big boy doesn't go down. As I mentioned earlier, we give him Mythic Hero as his Freeblade trait, so he counts the on-around as 2 higher, and that lets us start turning saves to 6s. We gave him Iron Bulwark and Sanctuary, so he's got a 4-up all the time. I don't think Sanctuary is strictly necessary, but it's that extra safety net. Feel free to bank that CP for Stratagems or spend it somewhere else. Next, we have the Helverins, who have Hunters of Beasts. That's +1 to hit against monsters and vehicles. And when you destroy a monster or vehicle with a Helverin, instead of gaining 1 honor for Lay Low the Tyrants, that replaces it and you gain 2. Also, they get +1 damage against Titanic, which is great in the mirror match. The Bastard's Helm on one of the Helverins gives it +1 wound all the time, and then it hands out another Bondsman ability, which is just +1 to wound. These guys are here to receive our offensive strat, and to deal prolonged range damage out of the reach of our opponents. The Warglaives come next. First, the ones with Strike and Shield can only be hit on 4s in melee, and ignore AP1 in melee. These guys receive our big buffs from the Paladin first, and they're usually the first to fall. They become extremely tough to take down when you combine the Paladin's buffs with the defensive stratagem to only be wounded on 4s. The Noble Combatants allow us some consistent melee as follow-up to what engages our Strike and Shield armigers. Finally, my own tech, I like Moiraxes with Last of their line as an anti-horde unit. Being able to reroll all your hits against anything with 6 or more models, combined with the double exploding on lightning locks, means you're going to start clearing out 20 mans with ease. If you want, you can substitute the Moiraxes for Helverins with Mysterious Guardian. Being able to come in on turn 1, circumventing the normal rules that prevent you from doing so, it's a great way to start hitting your opponent with Helverin fire early. Even better, if you cut the Moiraxes, a Warglaive, and the Ironsworn rocket pod on the Paladin, you can take a Crusader. Each of these appearing on turn 1 is going to give your opponent a huge headache when they start deploying. Currently though, I like the anti-horde aspect of the Moiraxes with all of this Gene Stealer cult nonsense running around. The next question that's always thrown at me is Paladin or Errant? The Errant giving advance and charge to Armigers instead of reroll ones to hit and wound is okay, but I prefer the Paladin. The reason for that is that moving 21 inches is often enough to get my Armiger where I need it to go. And for the most part, I want to stay out of melee with my opponent. Armiger melee without buffs actually isn't that good, and you're going to be tied up for a few turns if you try to engage often. Between rerolling ones and the reroll from Layla the Tyrants, I can turn the Armiger melee into something that is really just okay enough to kill those OBSEC units that are sitting on a point and smooth out my shooting phase. Finally, you might say, hey, you haven't talked about calculated targeting. That's the best strat knights have. Well, make no mistakes, calculated targeting is good, but it's not really supporting how we want to play. However, if you do take that mysterious Guardian Crusader, I would definitely start using calculated targeting. What makes me say that? Every turn, knights want to use transhuman and rotate ion shields. And when you're spending all of that CP right away on calculated targeting, if you kill 1 or 2 units, great, but it's probably overkill. And then they're going to target your Armigers and kill them. So I'd rather just not set up for calculated targeting and just keep my guys alive. For stratagems, as I just mentioned, they're extremely crucial to how this army plays. Armigers using full tilt take away your opponent's objectives and put you in a position to win. Survivors of Strife and Rotate Ion Shields allow you to tank hits and force your opponent to keep committing multiple unit activations to kill a single Armiger. Thin their ranks allows your Helverins to get the damage onto your opponents, and a Squire's Duty lets a tagged Armiger get out of the way. Nothing sucks more than when one Armiger in the front being tagged stops everyone else from being able to move. I cannot stress how important these stratagems are. I've listed these 5 because I use these 5 in nearly every game I play with Knights. As far as secondaries go, I really like Renew the Oaths, and I take it nearly every time. It scores immediately, you don't have to be wholly within 6, and the 4-up honor gain is a really nice failsafe when you're potentially going to lose honor. A trend you'll notice in my secondary selection across armies is that I tend to take Abhor the Witch, bring it down, and no prisoners when my opponent gives up 12 or more points to it. And that doesn't change here. Usually I'll swap out Yield or Grind for one of these, and it helps keep my mental load low while playing. Because when you're playing several games in a day, your mind state can wear down, and it's easier just to focus on denying your opponent's primary with Armigers and planning to just remove any models you see. It's not even a big deal if they kill your units back, so long as you're denying them those primary points and have set up to deny them again. In the case of playing against Knights, Custodes, Tau, or Votan, I always swap out Grind. In the Knights mirror match, you're probably going to kill about the same as your opponent, unless there's some crazy rolls. And against Custodes, you can't count on Grind because they could just roll 4s and just be left with a single guy in several different units, denying you the points. Against Tau, every turn they're going to be firing and fading that Crisis unit and just removing an Armiger. And for Votan, they're just going to laugh at you as the Hecaton Land Fortress slaps an Armiger off the board, and you're going to struggle to kill it. Finally, if I'm playing on Mission 13, Mission 22, or Mission 32, that's all where we have quarter deployments or strange deployments, where your battlefield edge is the long one. I swap out Yield for Engage. Because of that battlefield edge, anytime we want to move laterally to engage our opponent or find a shooting angle or get onto a point, we're going to be moving closer to our board edge, and we're just going to fail part of that secondary. Again, it goes to mental load. I'd rather just not worry about it and focus on moving and scoring. Now, you may say, hey, you're not taking behind enemy lines. You have an Armiger that moves 21 inches a turn, right? Isn't that just nuts? The reason we don't take it is the math works out better, and also Armiger bases are huge, and they're difficult to actually get wholly within, even doing technical maneuvers with pylons and consolidates. As for that math, if the opponent loses 4 points on primary from an Armiger standing on their point, then gains 2 points from Bring It Down by killing that Armiger, which, by the way, they're 100% going to take against you, then in total, our opponent loses 2 potential points. Now, if we took behind enemy lines, rarely will I be able to hold an objective that's wholly within their deployment zone while also scoring behind enemy lines. which means generally the opponent's going to keep those 4 points on primary, as well as get 2 points on bringing it down. Yeah, I mean, we're going to get 3 points on behind enemy lines, but our opponent gaining 6 and us gaining 3 isn't as good in my mind as just denying your opponent points. As far as Knight's movement game plan, we want to move differently based on the matchup and where our opponent positions. I'm going to provide general guidelines on how to set up and how to think about setting yourself up for success while you're moving in your games. Be aware, armigers deployed on the line against a melee-centric army or a very fast army with advance and charge can trip you up. First off, the armigers can just die to dedicated melee. And second, if they don't kill you, your armiger melee usually isn't good enough to kill them back, meaning you're going to be stuck there the following turn. This can often become a cascading effect, as I mentioned earlier, where one armiger in the front gets tagged, and because of buildings and other models, it prevents you from moving anywhere you'd want to go. This cascading effect can be even worse if you took yield no ground, where suddenly you can either stand almost still and do nothing, or you can just start failing your yield no ground. Here's an example of what deployment will look like a lot of the time. And to show you, I practice what I preach, the images are from War Games Live, which documented my second place finish at Mall in the Mall last weekend. If you haven't checked out a War Games live stream on YouTube, I highly recommend doing so. You can even watch how this game against Iron Hands turned out for me. Getting into the deployment. Since you only have 4 or 5 units to place, your opponent will nearly always get to see where you set up. So whenever I get to the table, I just start setting up, irregardless of who my opponent is or what mission we're playing. My deployment goals always remain the same, even if I'm playing on GW terrain or player placed. First, I set a strike and shield armiger up to move to touch 6 inches away from the center to do Renew the O's. I place the other armigers obscured as best as I can. Next, I always ask my opponents the range of their highest strength weapons, plus the movement of those units, and set up my paladin within 12 of the first armiger, 9 of another armiger, and outside of the range of those enemy weapons if I can. Next, I set up my Helverins towards the backside, obscured, with the Bastard's Helm Helverin within 12 inches of another armiger. Finally, I place my Noble Combatant armigers on the other side for my Helverin. This is to diversify where my threats can be on the table, granted I go first or second. Finally, I set up my Monarchs to be able to walk up and hold back objectives. If I know my opponent has a lot of mobility, like in this game, I place my Moirax in reserve. The reason is twofold. First, I want space in my deployment to give me more total room to maneuver my big dumb armiger bases. Second, when my forward units get tied up and fall back out of the way, my Moiraxes can come in and shoot whatever tied them up. If my opponent has many units containing 6 or more models, I'll leave the Moirax on the board and position them on the same side as the Noble Combatant. This is just so I can get the most opportunities that I can to start shooting with them. For turn 1 movement with Knights, I'm keeping in mind 3 main objectives in order of importance. First, how do I get an armiger to the center to do my Renew the O's action? And who is the next armiger that's going to go and do it? Second, who is moving forward to touch my opponent's objective next turn? And third, who's using my defensive stratagems on my opponent's turn? With these 3 questions, you can lay out your entire movement goal for each and every turn on every mission. In general, once you've locked these down, just start shooting at whatever you can. The more you can remove from your opponent's army, the harder time they'll have removing those armigers from their objectives. Now, it's also important to remember your role as Knights in every matchup. You are one of the premier stat check armies, meaning that you are always the one asking your opponent the question, can you deal with this? Playing Knights is like being a hammer crashing down on your opponent, something that they need to stop or deflect somehow. Overloading your opponent with all your models at once is often how you'll win these games, and stacking abilities as best you can on one armiger at a time is how you can win others. Both are fine strategies depending on what your opponent brings to the table, but what you absolutely cannot do as a Knights player that I see all the time is send 3 armigers out without sending everyone out into the open. There is no faster way to lose a game with Knights than drip feeding a fourth of your army to your opponent at a time. If you're going in, send everyone in. You need to overload with threat density. Sometimes playing as Knights, you'll run into an army that's stronger than you, tougher than you, and has better secondaries than you. While this is a rare occurrence as Knights are one of the poster children for durability, sometimes the GW Rules Balance team will throw you something you can neither outmuscle, out-tough, or outscore. For me, I just played it like any other army. It's the same game. I keep it cool, I set up my plan, and I execute it. If you want to see how it shakes out, I'll leave it to you guys to watch the stream on Wargames Live. Spoiler, the game is over in about an hour. I had a blast playing my Imperial Knights this weekend, and if you liked this tournament-based approach to how to simplify videos better, please let me know in the comments below and like this video. Also, consider subscribing. It's free and it really helps me out. If you're looking for high-quality coaching, or just want to get the best analysis on the 40k game currently, check out the Death or Glory livestream or the website. I've linked both below. You can even see an episode there featuring me. Finally, don't forget about Wargames Live. It's the best place to watch 40k on the weekends. And with that said, thanks for rolling some dice with Rice.